Very good. So as he said, I'm the founder and president of Secular Pro-Life, and I'm here to talk to you today about the effective education pillar of Students for Life's 5 pillars. And effective education encompasses not only the outreach that you're doing on your campus and in your broader community, but also educating yourselves and other members of your club. And self-education is a wonderful use of your time during your quarantine. So I wanted to talk in particular about the effectiveness of education for reaching non-religious people. As he said, I'm with Secular Pro-Life. That's kind of my thing. I'm a pro-life atheist myself. When I talk about non-religious people, that's a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to say nuns. That's N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S, N-O-N-E-S. That's the term that demographers and survey takers, pollsters use to describe people who, when they're asked about their religion, say none. And that would include atheists like myself, agnostics, people who say that they're spiritual but not religious, or who say religion is nothing in particular. It varies a bit, but the general idea is that people in the none group do not subscribe to any particular religious belief, don't find the Bible authoritative, generally don't believe in God or an afterlife. So why is it important to make sure that you're reaching the nuns? There's 3 big reasons. The first has to do with legality and constitutionality of pro-life policy. So I happen to be an attorney in addition to being a pro-life advocate, and in order to make sure that pro-life laws stand up in court, you need to be able to articulate a secular basis for that law, right? Because under the Constitution, we have the concept of separation of church and state, even though that particular phrase is not used. That's a concept that's drawn out of the First Amendment and various First Amendment cases over the years. So you have to be able to support your law on a secular basis. And it's fine to have overlap. So a classic example would be theft, right? Like the Bible prohibits theft. A lot of religious texts prohibit theft, and also state criminal codes prohibit theft. That's totally fine because you can very easily explain on a secular basis why we should not have theft or why we should prohibit theft. But you can't have a law that's solely on religious grounds. So for instance, if somebody were going to try to pass a law requiring people to go to confession every week, like that would not hold water because there's not a secular ground for that law. So the abortion industry and legal lobbyists for the abortion industry want people to think that banning abortion is more like mandatory confession and not like laws against that. Right? That's the game that they're playing. They want people to think that abolishing abortion breaches church-state separation. And that's not true. So we have to push back on that by making sure that our advocacy is open to people of every faith and none. Second reason this is really important has to do with changing demographics. So the United States is still majority Christian, but the percentage of Christians is increasing, particularly among younger people. And when you look at some of the data from the Pew Research Forum, they have done all kinds of surveys about this, people's religious beliefs and beliefs on various political issues. 31% of pro-choicers are religiously unaffiliated, are none. So basically a third of the people that you need to persuade are none, versus only 12% of pro-lifers. So we really need to work on those numbers. Perhaps the most important reason to make sure that you're reaching non-Christians in your advocacy and your dialogue is that nuns are overrepresented at the abortion center. So non-religious Americans are 22.8% of the general population. They are 38% of abortion customers. So that should really concern us as a movement, in the same way that we're disturbed when we see overrepresentation of Black people and Latinas at abortion centers. it should also concern us when we see that non-Christians and religious nuns are more likely to have an abortion. And just as it would be unacceptable to exclude people of color from your pro-life outreach, it should be unacceptable to exclude the non-religious. So for all of those reasons, we think it's especially necessary to talk about this. I do have a little bit of good news for you. I know that was all rather dreary. Good news is that making the secular case for life is really not that hard. Most pro-life arguments are secular in the sense that they don't require a belief in God or the supernatural to be logically sound. I'm not here to give you an entire apologetics presentation there. I know you've already, I think somebody said Stephanie Gray has been involved in this call. I heard from a couple of prior speakers talking about dialogue tips, and I echo a lot of what they've said. But I'll just drop a few ideas. First is to start by asking a lot of questions. In law school, if you ever wind up in law school, you'll hear about the Socratic method, which is all about asking question after question after question to lead people to the right answer themselves. But the reason it's really important to ask questions is because pro-choice is a huge umbrella. There's a lot of disunity within the pro-choice movement that they've managed to paper over pretty well, but there are some real rifts there. And the conversation that you're going to have with somebody who's pro-choice because they think the fetus isn't a human is very different from the conversation that you're going to have with somebody who's pro-choice because they want to prevent, people with hangers in the back alley, right? Those are two completely different people whose beliefs may conflict with each other. So starting by asking as many questions as you can to really clarify what the block is, what it is that's preventing that person from being pro-life, is the starting point. And also, as somebody else was mentioning earlier, does double duty because it also shows that you're interested in their opinion and you're finding connection with them rather than just like immediately talking at them, right? Secular arguments. The SLED argument, if you're not familiar with it, become familiar with it. That's a purely secular argument and a very effective one. As somebody else mentioned earlier, knowing your stuff on prenatal development is huge. And anything related to medicine, science, biology is music to my ears. Students for Life of America's traveling exhibits. Great content, and that's secular content as well. The Equal Rights Institute has some really great stuff. They focus, as the name might suggest, on equal rights arguments, human rights arguments against abortion. Pro-life feminism is something you should definitely familiarize yourself with. The fact that most women who are seeking abortions do so because they don't feel like they have a choice. It's not empowering at all. I mean, the rhetoric is so divorced from the reality there. And if I may, I'm going to plug our own brochures. So Secular Pro-Life has these pamphlets called Why Should Non-Christians Care About Abortion? And they go over some of the basics. Obviously, you can't fit an entire pro-life presentation into a pamphlet, but we talk about prenatal development. We talk about the science behind life at fertilization. We do talk about separation of church and state, the back alley argument, the idea that there are some humans who aren't real persons and the dangers of that rhetoric. And this pamphlet is really designed for you, for your campus outreach. So there's space on the back where you can write a little note from your club about when your next event or meeting is going to be, or put down your cell phone number or anything like that. So if you want some of these pamphlets, contact me or contact Ryan. We can order them for you. Obviously, it'll be a while before you're able to go out into the quad and use them in person, but you can be fully prepared for when that time comes. Back to bad news, which is that the abortion industry knows all of this, and they have a vested interest in making abortion a religious issue. That has been their strategy for over 50 years. If you don't know who Bernard Nathanson is, I'm going to talk about Bernard Nathanson, and you should look him up because he is a fascinating individual. He's since died, but he he was an atheist and an abortionist during the early years of the pro-abortion movement in like the late 60s, early 70s in the United States. And he actually was a co-founder of what is now NARAL, one of the major pro-abortion lobby groups. And he wound up in the 80s, when ultrasound technology became more widely available and life in the womb became harder and harder to deny, he wound up becoming pro-life and started spilling the secrets of what NARAL had been up to over the years. And he talks very explicitly about, or I should say writes very explicitly about the way that the abortion lobby used religion and exploited religious divides, specifically by trying to paint the pro-life movement as a Catholic thing and exploiting anti-Catholic prejudice that was prevalent at the time. So it is very much a deliberate strategy. It is not an accident that people treat abortion as a religious issue. And obviously the Catholic Church is pro-life. It's not like I'm denying that, but they've amplified it and twisted it. So now they can, every time, a Catholic organization speaks out against abortion, they can just say, aha, see those crazy Catholics, we told you. That's the game that they're playing. So people have been trained and conditioned to stereotype you for like their entire lives. I mean, people your age have never lived without this pro-abortion strategy in the background. So they are already inclined to tune you out and dismiss you as a religious nut. That's the game. And the result of this is that often you can be having a conversation with somebody and putting forward, the logical case, the feminist case, whatever it is that you're doing, never bring up religion at all, and they'll be the one to bring up religion. That happens all the time because they would much rather talk about religion and make this a theological debate rather than talk about who lives in the womb and what happens to them in an abortion. Like that's what they're trying. It's a distraction, essentially. But it can be a very effective one if you're not prepared to respond, right? So don't take the bait, right? If somebody is trying to turn this into a religious dialogue instead of like dialogue, here's how I recommend that you respond to that, right? Like somebody gets to hear you're just Catholic. If you're not, say that you're not, right? Like I just tell people, well, you're wrong. I'm an atheist. If you are religious, I suggest giving a response that disarms them a little bit and shows compassion and shows some humility by saying something like, I was raised in the Catholic Church, but it would be very arrogant of me to think that my religion is the only one that has answers or has insight on something as major as abortion. And then you can just segue into whatever your next point was going to be. So that's my suggestion for that. Sometimes people think that, I want pro-life Christians to hide that they're Christian. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you should hide your beliefs or trick people. I'm not saying you can't have a Christmas party. Have your Christmas party. Lots of atheists, by the way, do celebrate Christmas. For me, it's a family thing. It varies, but what I am saying is that reaching non-religious people in your community and on your campus won't happen automatically. It's something that requires thought and requires planning because there are these historical and political forces that are actively working against you on that front. Some very simple steps that you can take. I have, again, some literature for you. This is for you. This is not to distribute. This is 10 steps to build a religiously inclusive life organization. There's some tips here for dialoguing. Don't share your worldview. One really easy first step that you can take has to do with your marketing. If you as a club have decided, that this is going to be a human rights club open to people of every religious background and none, that you're not affiliated with your local Kneeling Center or whatever, and that's the decision your club has made, just put on all of your flyers and descriptions, Students for Life of XYZ College is a non-sectarian organization for life, or, you know, whatever it is, but, you know, find that little phrase that, you know, non-sectarian. If you're nonpartisan, you can say that too. But to affirmatively say it, because if you don't affirmatively say it, the assumption is going to be that you're a religious group, and specifically a Catholic group, most likely, we'll assume. My email again is info@secularprolife.org. As I said, I'm a resource for you. If you ever are working on some kind of campaign and you just want to know, hey, how would this sound to an atheist here? I'm happy to do that for you, totally free. I'll consult with you. Ryan also, of course, is a fantastic resource, and his colleagues as well. So it is 12:20, but if we want to make a little time for questions, I think Q&A is really valuable. So have at it.
Actually, because my club is strictly non-religious, I am a Christian myself, but I want the club to be strictly non-religious because I have had pushback and saying, because you're religious is because of what you know, is the reason you're pro-life. And there's this really, really headstrong girl at our school, and she constantly tells me in person, tells me on social media, comments in all of our photos, which all of our Instagram posts are strictly non-religious. I don't, when we're on the sidewalk, all of our signs that we put in the post are not religious at all. And she continues to say that Christianity is the root of all evil, and that this is the reason why you're pro-life. And how, even though I approached it and I told I told the whole school, I did everything to say we are strictly non-religious, just basic education. How can I still convince her in a way that I haven't already done, to where she can believe that this club is not religious? I'm religious, but the club is not.
So at a certain point, and I'm not saying give up on people, because like it was said before, you know, you plant a seed and you wait, and somebody may change their mind months or years down the road. But at a certain point, and particularly when you're talking about online debates like on social media or whatever, at a certain point, your primary goal is no longer to convince that person, but to convince the bystanders, right? It sounds like this person is acting a little nutty. If you can be the voice of reason and calm and then walk away, that is what I would do. And you can always @secular pro-life. Our Instagram is not as active as it should be, but we are on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a website too, obviously. So if you wanted to cite Secular Pro-Life, if you should have mentioned earlier the statistics on pro-life and religious affiliation and so on. There are over 12 million pro-life non-religious Americans. That is equal to the population of Illinois. So stop pretending we don't exist. We exist.
Yeah. Yeah, really. And I told her, I said, we can have a conversation about religion any other time, but for this specific time, like what?
Right, you're going off topic. You can just say, hey, you're going off topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we focus this conversation, please?
Yeah.
And when schools reopen, I'm happy to be a speaker for you.
Yes, absolutely. I'll definitely get you at our school when we're allowed in the open again.
Yes. And that goes for other people too. I'm telling her this because we happen to both live in Naples, but if you're within like a 2 or 3 hour drive of me, I'll come. And if it's further than that, I'll Skype. I'm here for you guys. Any other questions? No?
Okay, well, before we transition over, I'll just piggyback off of what Kelsey said and support a little bit. There are plenty of people in this country who come from backgrounds that aren't Christian, but still are pro-life or even pro-choice and have different arguments or debates or an understanding of this issue. For example, I recently was on a talk show with a Southern Florida radio show debating a lawyer who works for the National Organization for Women on abortion, and he's a Jewish rabbi, right? And so his perspective of like the abortion argument was framed from a Jewish perspective, right? And he came at it saying, well, Christ never talked about abortion in the Bible. Therefore, like, why are you worried about it? You're a Christian. And I was like, that's not why I'm here, right? Like, I'm not here to debate, Judaic principles versus Christian principles. Like, I'm not here to talk about that. I'm talking about a human rights perspective, right? So it is very valuable, especially when you talk with people of other faiths and other backgrounds, to know the science and the philosophy behind this argument so that you can converse with anyone in a daily basis. Because like she said, 12 million people who are pro-life, who are non-religious, like that's a significant number, right? And there's going to be a ton of people from different faiths and backgrounds. Like, I've talked to students who are Muslim in Florida, right? Like, there are plenty of people here in this state and country that might not share the same background as us that we still need to be able to reach and access.
Yeah.
So understanding these principles is so important. So Kelsey will be a very valuable resource if you want to learn how to talk to people, especially if they're atheist, right?
Well, okay, and I cut this for time, but just real quick, I will talk a little bit about secular pro-life itself, because although the leadership of secular pro-life is all atheist, we actually welcome all comers. So we get a lot of people who are atheist, agnostic, none. We also get a lot of religious minority groups who just didn't feel at home elsewhere. So we get Muslims, we get Wiccans, Mormons, various varieties of Protestant and Catholic and Protestant people who just want to support us, who like the approach that we're taking. So you're all welcome to be a part of Secular Pro-Life, follow Secular Pro-Life on social media, use our memes, share our articles. Like I said, we're a resource for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelsey. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.